And might as well get started since we have a decent number of people here. So my name is Blowin. As you can tell, I'm a fitness geek and a technology geek all at the same time. And I think this outfit basically does both this primary thing. Because I'm basically wearing a workout outfit that also doubles as a Deadpool costume at the same time. And I'm carrying around a big giant lightsaber too. Anyway, I know you guys are here to basically hear me talk about different processors and how, like, nowadays, hey, guess what? If you don't have an x86 CPU, and so what? Because basically now we have a lot of stuff that's web-based, and of course, many different variations of Linux. One prime example would be this little baby right here. A lot of you guys may recognize this just from looking at it as a Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi got faster and faster. This is like one of the old school B models. Then of course after that it came with a Raspberry Pi 2. And now you have a Raspberry Pi 3, which I recently purchased and been taken out of the box. And whenever you get a chance, that will more likely have Kali Linux installed on there. Because the nice good thing about these little single board computers is that you can actually play around little mini networks, hook them together while actually demonstrating a real network and paying a whole bunch of money to replace it quick, because you blow one of these out and only $35 to replace it, you're good to go. And I thought Kali Linux would be a perfect analogy because, hey, we have Kali Linux, so why not play around with Kali Linux? And even going further in the past, even before we had Raspberry Pis and single board computers, people actually hacked their game consoles, like the original Xbox, which I ranked was x86 base. So I remember back in the day, I used to run Linux on that, and even on this machine right here, which has some weird CPU that Sega came up with, and actually has a pre-installed Windows on it, but I actually did manage to get DOS to run this thing as well. So because this thing was actually able to run DOS with free DOS, I was actually able to get a open source program free program that should run on this machine. So now I actually do have a homebrew game on the Dreamcast, and not just on regular PC, because of all the tools that come out through open source technology. So yeah, someone actually managed to get free DOS on here through DOSBox. So if you have a Dreamcast, you have to look up DOSBox for the Dreamcast, and from there, actually call something in QBasic or Turbo C++, get it to run on there, boom, it will now run your Dreamcast. Just be aware that there are limitations on this. So you think, sweet, this is my old DOS machine. No, this is your old Spectrum from back in the early 80s. And I probably maybe one of the people old enough to remember the Sinclair Spectrum from back in the day with the rubbery keyboard. Which then takes us way back into the past, because of course you had the old microcomputers like the Sinclair Spectrum, Commodore. Everyone had their own different parts, different CPUs, and of course IBM's had the x86. And eventually Apple finally gave us a decent looking GUI with Mac OS back in 1984. And as a kid growing up, I remember first programming language I saw was BASIC, and they showed us this on the old Apple IIe. So yeah, back in the day, hey, you actually build something, compile it. Okay, now we have it run on Apple. Now we have it run on the newer Macs. Now we have it run on Windows. Now we gotta make it run on DOS. Now we gotta make it run on Amiga. Now we gotta make it run on Commodore. Now we gotta make it run on Spectrum, so you're all over the place trying to get yourself to run right. Then one of our biggest saviors was, of course, Linus when he came up with Linux. Okay, guess what? We're going to take the Linux kernel, now we're going to port it to almost every platform out there. So now it's not that big of a headache. You just got to recompile it for your different hardware. Okay, not that bad. Different architecture. However, now we have a common operating system and common development tool. Then, of course, years roll by. A few years later, we now have Java. And now with Java, you get everything to run on any platform, any CPU, without any issues. However, now you run into some slowdown because it's running through a Java VM. Because likewise, I actually had a program to run on my desktop computer. I was running Linux, Windows, Mac OS 10, as well as Raspberry Pi. However, I noticed that it ran super slow in here, had some weird audio issues when I ran on the Mac, because you know it's a little simple game that I built. Mac had some weird distortion issues. Then I changed the to go, boom, Mac works, Windows works, and then Linux is broken. Then I try to make the fixes on Linux. Linux works beautifully. Of course, on both this CPU and as well as the x86 CPU I was testing it on, works perfectly fine on Windows. And then I go to an older Mac, and the audio is half muted. But the newer Macs, it works. So then you run into the gotchas that are, that come with Java. Then of course people say, okay, let's use C++. That way we have a standard library. The problem is C++, since it's not designed since it's not exactly designed to run on any hardware, any platform, then you got to recompile it on different machines based on the hardware specs you're going to go through as well as the operating system. Which is why now I'm actually glad that newer tools actually have the export feature. So hey, guess what? You open up this IDE, oh, export to Windows, export to Mac, export to Linux, and so on. One prime example of that, of course, now would be Game Maker. So does anyone have any questions to go from that point? All right, moving on away from desktops now, of course, we also have more web apps right now. Because before it used to be a situation where, hey, guess what, you're dependent solely on what's compiled to run on that piece of hardware. That is until the late 90s came around and we started getting websites. So now you can put your content on these nice, beautiful HTML sites that anyone can access as long as they're on a web-enabled machine. Then, of course, as time went along, instead of being static pages, they became more interactive, and now you have full-fledged apps that run for the web. One prime example I think would be Office 365. So I can pretty much use my Office, I can go in there and use Outlook on a Mac the same way I would in a Windows machine without any issues. Well, any issues that, well, it's Outlook, so issues will happen regardless. But anyway, I can now use it on multiple platforms without any issues, and even, strange enough now, you can run Office on a Linux machine without having to hack into Wine. So web apps make everything a lot better. Even now going to the point where it used to be where we had these big giant computers that take over the entire room. Then we got the desktops. Then we had the luggable laptops, which I did not feel like bringing here for demonstration purposes because I didn't feel like trying to lug in an entire luggable. Then finally the laptops, and now we have our phones and tablets. And this phone actually, ironically, has more horsepower than this machine right here. So within 10 years, it got to the point where your desktop that's 10 years old will now be less powerful than your phone. Any questions? All right. Any social topics you guys want me to go into at this point?
Sure. Wasn't the title of this talk like, is the chip architecture obsolete? Or?
Yeah, like very not still relevant. That's why I kind of came with a few examples of how everything's kind of evolved from back in the 80s and the 90s. So now it really does make that big of a difference because you have different export tools within your IDEs like Game Maker and then some of the newer new C++ IDEs. And of course Java kind of started killing it way back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So you get the point of, hey, guess what, with Java.
What is chip architecture, I guess?
Oh, I think basically it's like, you have different architectures because, it was even more sporadic back in the early 80s where you had the Spectrum and their chipset. Then you had Intel's chipset for the x86. Then AMD, which really doesn't count because that was a clone of Intel. And then Apple, they went from the Motorola CPUs to the PowerPC to finally Intel. And a few other off-brands in between, especially when it came to mobile devices. Because first, before they came up with the iPhones that they have now, these were pretty much, I think they're going back and forth between Intel and ARM, and then before this had the Newtons. The Newtons were basically like the predecessor to the Palm Pilot. So basically, spin screen tablet with its own pen that you could pretty much take notes with and go to meetings with. Unfortunately, it wasn't that successful. However, Apple then built into the Newton and came up with the iPod, and the iPhone, and iOS later on.
But it still doesn't really, how is the chip architecture different than what we have today?
You actually have more compatibility. So basically, I should say, hey, it should have actually been based on, hey, guess what? You're now more compatible than you were 10, 20 years ago. Because it used to be back in the day where people were afraid of buying Macs because they're like, hey, you may not be able to do something you need to do your job because Mac has completely different architecture, different operating systems, and so on.
It's a different CPU from a different company. They've designed the silicon differently. So if you have a binary or an application written in assembly for Spark, it won't run on an x86 CPU. Like, it won't error, it won't load, it won't do anything.
So when you refer to chip architecture, are you saying that like the code that you write is tied to your specific chip?
The binary is.
Compiled binary.
Yeah, the compiled binary is.
There's multiple chips out there that have been used. You got your MIPS, as we said, the Spark, the various power architectures, and those are all architectures of the CPU, and they have their own individual opcodes that you would write using assembly, or if you really wanted to kill yourself in machine code. But when you compile from whatever high-level language, it actually makes it into an assembly file, and that goes through the assembler. But it's compiled specifically for that architecture of the CPU. So technically now, a binary could run on a PC or a Mac because they're both using the Intel x86 chips. However, if you go back, 7 years ago when they switched, you could not do that because they're using the power architecture of the chips. Prior to that, when the Macs switched from the Motorola 68K series to the power, they actually had what they called fat binaries, which were compiled for both the 6800 series and the power, which meant they were double the size, at least in the executable portion. But every CPU can only run instructions that are specific to that CPU. And that doesn't just include the processors in your computers. It also goes down to the level of microcontrollers and embedded systems.
You can have a binary that's written for an Intel CPU with SSE4 extensions. And you take that binary, try to run it on an Intel CPU without SSE, it won't run. At least once it hits those instructions.
It'll, at best, it'll stop. At worst, it'll cause the CPU to lock up.
So isn't it really the same now as it was before? We just have different chips?
Yes and no. To a large degree, things have consolidated within the industry.
I don't see any consolidation.
Well, I mean, there's big ones that are Intel and ARM, right?
But see,
Right.
what ARM has, they're not compatible within ARM.
Oh yeah, there's lots of
Yeah.
different flavors of ARM.
I mean, you know, you take your Beaglebone and you take the Raspberry Pi and you can't necessarily run the things on
But
each one of those.
The desktop PC market is definitely almost consolidated exclusively
Well,
with
that one has
Intel.
been.
Right, but then
That
you
was
have
never
layer the
split.
OS on top of it.
x86 today, I mean, you might like AMD, but x86 today really means Intel. AMD has lost that battle.
Well, the Intel 64-bit architecture you're looking at is AMD's design.
Well, it is, but Intel is owning the market.
They certainly own a lot of the chip making market today.
Yes.
Well, I mean, all the game consoles run off AMD right now, right?
Actually, yeah, they do.
AMD
Yeah,
is
so
keeping
they're-
alive. They are not in the best financial position, but they are keeping alive, and it would be in Intel's best interest to make sure they stay alive.
Well,
I mean,
there's
no,
actually-
Yeah, I mean, you're basically
Yeah,
saying it's about the
there's a
Apple was in
reason
20
that-
years ago.
Intel might own the desktop market, but that's a shrinking share of the market, and even Intel is publicly giving up on that. They don't expect that to be their company's future.
No,
Then
they're,
there's, the cloud, so server chips.
Yep.
But I can tell you, like, Ubuntu runs really well on ARM, and ARM64 is in development. Like, FreeBSD, the FreeBSD project is doing a lot of work for ARM64. So, yeah, I mean, that's what's going to eat their lunch.
Yeah, because ironically, funny that you brought up BSD, because I was actually, we're going to be our next project for both this machine and this. Because that's another one of the operations I feel is like really open to a lot of different platforms. Unfortunately, I also found out playing around with BSD, it also seems to be the buggiest when you try to swap from one machine to another.
Their ARM support is probably not as fully implemented as the ARM support in Linux.
Yeah.
But that's because the ARM support in Linux is funded by the chip makers.
But
Exactly.
It also depends what kind of app you're running. As he mentioned, if I'm running a web app, it doesn't matter what CPU I'm using, and it doesn't matter what CPU the server's using.
Right, because you're not getting a binary
Right.
per se that you're running. You're getting.
I'm getting a
JavaScript.
service provided, some data stream coming up and going down. And so it really doesn't matter what chip I'm using or what chip the server's using. I don't care.
Well, you as an end user, like somebody in the middle has to.
Well, obviously, somebody that's doing the development cares, yes.
No,
But as an
they
end
would
user, I
price
don't
that
care.
I think you still care. You have to know that the differences. You can't, the binaries that run on your iPhone won't run on your Android.
No, but if I'm talking to a web service, it doesn't matter.
Well, if you're talking to a web service, but a lot of things still run on a web service.
Well, that's true. I'm just saying that the discussion has to determine what are you actually trying to do. I mean, If you're running a game, that's going to be a binary that's very specific. It won't even run on all video cards on an Intel chip, right?
Yeah.
Because it cares about, you know, specific opcodes that run well on certain video cards.
Even though there actually are a few libraries out there that kind of go around it, unfortunately, it's like, yes, we have more compatibility, but now you run into different lagging issues because performance takes a hit because now your code's trying to read the instructions for like multiple chipsets to actually find the right instruction set for your machine.
So I think my point is that whether or not the chip is relevant, your architecture is relevant, depends on what you're doing. If you're all on the web, it doesn't.
Oh, no, it may not matter to you, but to the guy who's selling that web server, they're gonna buy the thing that's got the cheapest CPU power on it. And today, unfortunately, that almost entirely means Intel.
That doesn't, well, so most, and I
That
mean
might
like
turn out to be,
99%.
that might be turn out to be ARM in the future. People
Well,
tell me-
99% of the servers out there really don't use the CPU power they have.
Right.
Somebody did a study, Amazon AWS is basically 30% utilized. So there's 70% of the capacity, the CPU capacity and memory capacity of Amazon's
It
cloud
doesn't
is
matter what-
untapped.
Yeah, and I have a
which
confession I have to make. I have my own little Linux server at home. It has only 2 gigs of RAM and a AMD chip from 5 years ago, and it runs beautifully.
But what does it do most of the time? It sits there and is doing, and it's idle most of the time.
Right,
probably,
just
right?
spewing out web pages.
Yeah. Like my little FreeBSD file server, it's, right now, its job is like if I'm streaming a movie off of it in the evening, then it's actually doing some
Is that
work.
the corporate market, or is
it's-
that like AWS?
The corporate, like for like machines that are about 30% utilized,
If that's the corporate world, then that says that's basically machines that haven't yet been virtualized, they're not yet.
no, that's
Okay.
machines running on AWS.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the biggest AWS users are corporate users.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still not gonna matter, because
And even-
what's gonna matter there, I mean, even if it's only 30% used, if it costs twice as much for that CPU for the same amount of CPU power, it doesn't matter whether it's 30% used or not, it's still more expensive.
Yeah.
So the economics are the same in any case.
So what I'm saying is like, I think Intel might have something to be afraid of from ARM.
Yeah.
Without ARM beating Intel on performance.
I think they have to equal it in performance, and I think they have to exceed it in cost.
So I
And
think
it
it's gonna
doesn't,
be
it doesn't
cost,
matter,
but I don't
it
think it's
doesn't
gonna
matter
be.
if it's 60% unused.
Yeah, I don't-
You may care a lot, you may not care about performance and throughput so much as you care about response time. And response time, it could be 90% unused, and you may still care a great deal.
Now, that study that you're referencing, was that the totality of the servers, or did that take into account the peak usage utilization time?
That was over a period of time,
Okay.
and
Yeah. Did
so
it
kind of
include
average, and it was looking at, they did some really interesting things like looking at the latency of certain syscalls from the VM. They were just doing this from the VM, and they ran enough instances to determine how utilized the physical hosts were.
So I'd be curious to see the graph when it peaked, because that's really when you're sizing a VM. You need to size it for all your VMs, when are they gonna hit their peak processing need? So you don't
What
have
they do in
to have
AWS is they just spin it more
Yeah.
instances.
I think you had a good point with response time though, because like anything less than 100 milliseconds or more than 100 milliseconds is not considered instantaneous, and what you really want is something that appears instantaneous for response times.
Well, so you
To
also
that,
have kind of like the devices are doing some of the work, not
Right,
just the
you're not
servers.
just the CPU.
Yeah.
If you're just doing, say, web pages, it may depend a lot on the data that your web application is going to access. And that's coming out of the hard drives and all that.
If it's 60% unused, then what that really means is you start caring an awful lot about the ability to power down CPU cores when you're not using them and optimize things that way. And if you've got an architecture that allows you to power things down at night when no one's using it, bring them up during the day when people use them, it would be a North American access pattern, then that would be a big selling point for a server farm.
But this stuff we're talking more seems like something more like integration or embedded systems. So like in Southeast Michigan, of course, a lot of car controllers, and nowadays more and more of them are digitized, like operating on the CAN bus, things like that. So, transmission controllers, your, entertainment or infotainment connections for the telematics.
Yeah, then that raises another issue, because now the biggest concern, of course, would be information assurance with the auto industry. And make sure no one can hack into the system and try to mess around with the GPS system. and
Which
so
has been
on.
demonstrated as capable
Yeah.
of happening recently.
Yeah, I've actually read up on it a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not exactly ready for an automated car yet. If that means that someone can hack into the system, oh yeah, guess what? You think you're going to Michigan? No, now we're taking to Texas. Oh, you think you're going to Texas? Now we're taking to Australia.
Well, part of that is you have to use the common sense approach if you're using the GPS. But on the cars, yes, you can hack into them, but you still need a physical connection onto the CAN bus in order to make those changes. So if you go to the CAN bus, you can tell
Like
your
the
car.
problem with the Jeep Cherokee was the radio that was running QNX, the BlackBerry OS, and it was listening for Telnet or something like that. And then it had its own internal SMMP traps or something like that that it was running. Except for those scripts, and they're like, oh yeah, so cool, now that we're in here, all we have to do is get a root exploit. Oh wait, all of these scripts are already running as root. And they're trivial to exploit those scripts. So they got root on that radio, and then they found there was a bridge chip between the radio and the car. But that bridge chip would accept a new firmware from either interface blindly.
Wow.
So what the user would see when they're getting a hacked Jeep Cherokee was the radio just turns on and turns on. They just need to reboot the radio to flash that firmware, and then game over, you're done.
Okay,
So that's
the
without a
developers-
physical connection, right? I guess
That was
is the
over the
point.
air,
Yeah.
over the Sprint cell phone network.
First thing that came to my mind when I saw that the developers learned nothing from Microsoft in the early 2000s when people hacked into a real brute.
All they need to do is like get a seasoned sysadmin in part of their development process. Is like, why the hell is this thing listening on Telnet?
I mean, that makes about as much sense as somebody say, hey, we're going to build a Death Star, have it set, you can blow it up by a little weakness in the trench, and build an even bigger Death Star that can be blown up again 30 years later. Wait a minute, that did happen.
The biggest security threat to anything out there is the person behind the keyboard.
Yes.
You can't patch human stupidity.
No.
You can't eliminate it, but then you can get arrested.
Actually, you can slightly patch human stupidity. You just build processes that don't use humans.
Skynet, all right.
Yeah.
I agree with your car thing. I think they really need to like incorporate some legislation for required pen testing or something like that.
I think that's like that. Those discussions have already been started. because of
Okay.
the popularity of the Jeep Cherokee thing, and then those guys also hacked. Those same two guys, like they hacked the Prius and the Ford Escape.
Yep.
They didn't have a cell network connection, so they did it by, like, with a laptop physically plugged into the vehicle.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think you need laws to make this. I mean, the fact that it's been publicized that this can happen pretty much means that they have to fix it before they go out to consumers and say, here, you would want to buy this Jeep Cherokee.
I disagree with that. Like, people are going to initially pay a lot of attention to it, but then cost-cutting measures are going to come in, and tighter budgets and things like that, and eventually the pressure is going to be on to cut corners.
Well, that's
And then there's gonna be an
that's true no
exploit
matter
again.
what. And if you had legislation, exactly the same problem still exists. That doesn't change it.
Well, it creates a legal it creates a legal repercussion if you
No,
break
doesn't.
it. Like, you could get
No.
that
That
heavy
doesn't protect
financial.
consumers. That just makes you feel a little bit safer in the short run.
I disagree. I think laws actually provide. I mean, I agree that free market.
Well, the Chinese have started rules against pollution, and they have lots of pollution equipment.
What if you do this from another country?
Yeah.
Well, you have laws that you'd still be sued with U.S. laws. I mean, I agree that like you should
What if you're in
ideally
the
free market
nicest
is enough
country?
to
What if you're in the
influence
nicest
companies,
country?
but that's practically not the case. You need laws and market principles to control companies.
That's only true with well-informed consumers. I mean, really well-informed, smart consumers. And we don't always have that situation.
Yeah, exactly. You need well-informed consumers for free market principles to apply.
A good example is that
You can't be well informed about everything under the sun. It's humanly impossible.
That's why you need laws.
Exactly, I'm in agreement with you.
Laws are not the end-all, be-all, and you can just willfully disregard them. Whether or not, the only way laws are going to be effective is if enforcement is done in a timely manner, and they take people to task, because there is one thing that all companies understand and don't like, and that's losing money.
And there are already plenty of laws about selling defective cars.
How do you define defective, though?
And I think you can argue at this point, a car that lets you come it in and then flash the ROM is defective.
I don't know if you could, I don't think you could say that. Like, nobody like, you get a jury in there, they're gonna be totally confused.
If the jury understands that I could do something to your car and make you run into the wall.
Yeah,
That
that
won't
part
be
they'll
confusing.
understand really well.
That won't be confusing.
Yeah.
It won't matter what the something is, they won't have to understand how, just what.
You are doing a recall now. and they did that with-
Volkswagen's a prime example in some regards of this, as far as the laws go. The laws are on the books. They did it anyway.
Yep.
Yeah, they cheated on the emissions.
Yeah, well, they thought they were more clever than the
And
government.
it's gonna cost them lots and lots and lots and lots of money.
Because of the laws, because they broke the law.
Right.
And if you look at the drug industry, that's one of the most heavily regulated industries that we have, and it's also the one that has the largest barrier to innovation of any kind.
I agree that there are barriers to innovation. Here, that's a balance between safety and innovation.
Yeah.
I think there should be a greater emphasis on safety and at the expense of slower innovation.
But I think the emphasis on safety, I think the publicity is much more valuable than any set of laws could ever be.
Yeah, because ironically, the whole issue of people being able to shut down cars in the middle of a freeway is more than 2 years old. Because I remember probably like a little over 10 years ago, Mel Farr was like one of the used car dealerships. His auto business got shut down because he was selling used cars that had the low jack technology built inside of it. So he was able to, over the air, shut down your car while you're in motion.
Well, that was never an intended feature of the technology. It's supposed to keep it from being researched. It's just miswired.
Right.
The shut down the whole electrical system rather than just the starter. But still, yeah.
So I think kind of getting back to the point about like CPU architectures, there's a lot of different architectures that are purpose-built for certain jobs, but they're not your desktop general purpose stuff. Like your general purpose CPU, like, okay, so we have a couple of different general purpose CPU architectures now. We have Power, we have the S390 stuff from IBM,
that all
ARM, and x86.
Yep.
But then you have like my Ubiquiti edge router has some weird MIPS CPU that's got two 500 megahertz cores, but that's not actually where it processes packets. It's some other hidden core that they don't talk about.
That's the
that does the packet
that's the
process.
future of all computing technology. At this
or-
point, we can put lots of CPU cores on a chip with other things. So inevitably, you're going to end up with these things with an ARM
But does it cost
core.
less than $100 for a multi-core router that can do regular traffic? No.
Well,
So I think that is where you'll still have like specific CPU architectures is in the embedded space or the low-cost space, where it is cheaper to make something that is purpose-built for the job.
Yeah, well,
there is a hidden benefit to multi-core CPUs, and that's because the failure rate in manufacturing is very high, and by enabling a certain set of cores to work together, that gives you an acceptable level of failure without having to trash the whole chip.
Yeah, I mean, like a 4-core chip is still a 6 or 8-core chip. It's just that it has those cores disabled because they default.
yeah,
Or because they want more money.
the manufacturing rate, actually, that's also a function of the maturity of the technology. The low yield rates usually is early in the production cycle. By the time they get to the end of the production cycle, you probably those 4-core chips that they're selling are actually 6-core chips that they find all 6 work and they turn off 2.
It's funny you brought that up because that just made me have a brain fart. And I just remembered, we also have something known as hardware firewalls instead of software firewalls, because pretty much the chipset is actually pretty much it's designed from start to say, hey, guess what? This appliance has this chipset in here. Set to run these instructions with this software to give you extra security in your network, versus the software which can do most of the stuff, but then it's going to run at a much slower speed and possibly not be as secure as the actual hardware solution.
That's where you see the ASICs come into play, especially when you're talking business-grade networking equipment. Everything in business-grade networking equipment especially in switching, is ASICs for everything. You don't know what it is. It's something that they've basically spec'd out and had custom built for them. So it does all of that, as you're saying, in the hardware as opposed to the software.
Like the firewalls and intrusion detection systems.
When you're talking to CPU cores and those things, they're usually not customized instruction sets. It's usually like an ARM7, E7 core or something like that, and it just runs with GCC because developing a custom instruction set for your custom routers usually.
I know that router specifically has there is something that is hardware accelerated.
Oh, they're very likely.
They have like they have 2 MIPS cores.
Is it part of the instruction set, or is it
I
another
don't. I haven't dug into what it is.
Okay.
But I know that there's something other than just the 2 CPU cores that process
very
the
likely.
packets.
Yeah, no, like these other people were saying, it's very attractive to put in special data paths, ASICs, things that do that stuff faster than you can do. Yeah.
And if you want to look at the lower end of the spectrum, you've got your microcontrollers like the Atmels and all of them. Those are really, really simple controllers, really simple processors, maybe 100 instructions. But we interact with more of those every day than we do with the larger CPUs, be it ARM or x86 or Power. That you can buy those small microcontrollers for less than a quarter.
And there might be a time 10 or 15 years from now when those little tiny controllers actually are like ARM V7s or something like that. And some of them may actually be emulating today's 18 mils or whatever, and because they may not be worth anybody. They may be cheaper to buy the expensive CPU and emulate the instruction set than to rewrite the software.
Yeah. And I know ARM has multiple flavors of their cores, and one of them is a microcontroller, specific one. So you're not going to find that in your phone. You're going to find, I forget how they designate it, but if you need an advanced microcontroller, advanced real-time operating system, you can use an ARM core for that.
Yeah, and it's funny because now, going back to the single board computers, you can get a little $5 chip or even the Raspberry, sorry, the Raspberry Pi Zero. That's the one that just got $5. It's only like this big, but I played around with it, found, okay, this thing is actually more powerful than the full size That's I had that was this big when I was 10 years old. So something that was this big when I was 10 is now this small right now.
Somebody published something that it's a PC board, and you can plug 16 Pi Zeros onto it and make it a cluster.
Nice. Yeah, it reminds me of this crazy lab experiment. We have a few buddies were thinking about doing it back in undergrad. We said, hey, let's grab some old cell rock computers and cluster them together. Didn't go over too well. Or we saw footage online and said, yeah, this could get really bad really quick because there's like some weird Linux how to do stuff we saw where they actually grabbed like 8 systems and pretty much had them all networked together to kind of get one full speed system. And the hilarious part was these people actually hacked in the original Xbox to get the same effect. So now say you had to grab like giant Xbox or x86 computers, you can now, like you said earlier, have one board that pretty much handles all that stuff for you. All right.
I think there's always going to be somebody that is competing with x86, even if x86 is going to be dominating the market. I know that like Google, for instance, is doing enough business with IBM that they can have power around because Google doesn't want to be beholden to Intel.
No.
So they want to be able to say, all right, clear option, we're not buying Intel anymore, we're going all
I
power.
was really excited when I saw there's a Chinese company that puts out a PowerPC machine. As far as I could tell, it was probably might have been designed as an evaluation card for Google or something originally, and just put it out. Yeah, I could imagine Google or somebody like that basically deciding, gee, ARM processors, we have a standard server, we can get them for cheaper and they consume less power per CPU than Intel. We're just going to buy transloaded them. And I think that's one of the things that's got to have Intel quite concerned.
I recently heard that Intel might be limiting the ability for you to use which Windows operating system. I think in like fourth quarter 2017, you can't install Windows 10 or less on their desktop processors. They're trying to like work in conjunction with Microsoft to limit their ability to install different.
If they're doing that for servers, they're probably shooting themselves in the foot.
I don't think they would do it for servers. I haven't seen anything in the server space like I've seen in desktop space.
And they might try to do it in this, if they did that in the desktop market, I think they might just kill the
What-
desktop market.
They're already doing it.
What I think it was, I think I know what article you're referring to, it's that Microsoft is not going to do the back support for the older end-of-sale operating systems on the latest, greatest.
So they're gonna stop adding support.
Right. Which is effectively the same thing, but.
They've been doing that for a while now,
Yeah.
effectively.
Yes.
Yeah, that's also why they've actually been trying to force people to actually upgrade to Windows 10. If you have a Windows 7 or Windows 8 machine, if you don't have your system set properly, they'll just say, oh, well, guess what? Windows 10 is now installed in your machine. They'll just download and install it without you clicking yes or no on it.
So the other thing is this happens in the server market as well, with Linux. If you have a machine that's like 12 years old, you probably won't be able to install the Ubuntu Trusty or Ubuntu Xenial on it. It will not work.
No.
That, support for all that, some of the really old hardware, it's just getting ripped out.
Because of all the new instructions that have been added, those are considered standard, everyone has them, and try to put it on a CPU, if it doesn't have it, it's going to barf all
Well,
over it.
if you've got a CPU that old, you're starting to talk about 32-bit machines, and you're starting to talk about machines that probably take more power, electricity-wise, and the payback for buying something new becomes very attractive at that point.
Or you take that 2-core or 4-core machine and you virtualize it on the machine.
And that's your other answer. If you need that 32-bit ancient processor, you virtualize it and run it on your new fancy modern spiffy machine.
Or you put it in a container and you can stop wasting your work with virtualization.
There are choices. Yeah.
So it's been happening in the history of time.
I mean, Apple
In
drops,
general.
they drop support
Oh, yeah, they
for
do
their
it.
older, like even when they were just doing PowerPC, they're like, okay,
Yep.
that's it. This version of OS, or this version of OS 10 will not run on a G3. You have to have a G4 or newer.
Exactly. I remember the whole debacle when they went from PowerPC to Intel 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because they said, oh yeah, guess what? We just like virtualize your old PowerPC apps to run on your Intel machines.
And then they killed
That did not work nicely at all. And then a year later, they said, you know what? Just throw it out.
I actually found that it worked fairly well, and then I had some application that I was still using.
Yeah.
That Rosetta thing that, lets you run PowerPC. And then they killed that, I think, just to like force people to
Move on.
move on, and then also just so that there's another thing that you probably
People in the corporate IT world are amazingly conservative about various things, and so there almost certainly will be a market for 32-bit in things that can run 32-bit Intel software into the foreseeable future. 20 years from today, there will be somebody who's running and will pay real money to somebody else to do that.
Banks are still running XP on their.
There are banks still running IBM 360 binaries.
There's embedded OS X boxes still out there, not Apple OS X.
Your SDK applications, they'll actually still run on a brand spanking new IBM CPU2.
Yes, there's a real market for that, and that's going to be around no matter what. It may not be a big part.
It just runs the machine.
Orly Airport got shut down in France. They were running, I don't remember if it was Windows 95 or something previous. It was part of their air traffic control system. They crashed a couple months ago and shut down the whole airport.
Well, that's amazingly modern for an air traffic control system.
I don't know if it ran everything, but it was like, it was part of it.
I remember something about the FAA or somebody trying to get rid of 70, 90 doors or something out of terminals at one point.
I know a lot of terminals, they still just break stuff out of the block of wood and slide it to the guy next to them.
But it brings up a good point on some of this stuff. A lot of point-of-sale systems still run on a scaled-down version of Windows 95 as far as the terminals going. Or CE. And the reason for that is it takes so long to vet the software on that system, because the point-of-sale systems, like the terminals at the stores, they don't run full Windows 95. They get licensed from Microsoft, they go into the source code, they take out all these pieces that a point-of-sale terminal doesn't need. And it's just like how vendors, modify Android for their phones. And the amount of time and money it takes to update that is just huge. So they're going to hold on until the last minute on any of that stuff. Because
The things are giving me nightmares.
It still works, and there's no way to upgrade it. It's a forklift replacement.
It's a rip and replace.
Yeah.
And
You're gonna be running both side by side for a long, for a while, and you're gonna have angry customers because because of it too.
And that actually gave me a flashback to my second job for my first job right out of high school. I was still in college. Basically, I had to work with the same type of system, Windows NT 4.0, with the worst patching in history, having to reinstall it from floppy disk.
They hated you, didn't they?
Huh?
They hated you.
I was the guy that had to install it, so I hated people that broke the system. They found, oh, well, you know how to use computers. Here's this stack of floppies. And I look at the system like, this is going to suck for the next 2 hours. And it's like, yes.
You got it done in 2 hours, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, it was
Well, you know, you pop it in, a few floppies in there. Unfortunately, there was some network connection and then loaded everything else into the system, reboot, plug and pray everything works, then, hey, your system's up and running. Have a good day.
Yeah, I remember installing early versions of Unix on very small computers using a stack of floppies. And inevitably, floppy 6 of 17 would have a block error on it.
And that's also the same issue with Windows 95 2, our family computer back in the day as well.
That's okay, you just take out the disk, wave it a little bit, and pop back in, and it'll probably work.
There was an annoying dance that went with that, and it sometimes worked.
Yeah, so I was fond of doing the old Nintendo trick. For some reason, working on some of the floppies as well. Just like, then pop it back in.
I read that like actually most of the thing where you take the cartridge out and blow in it, it's just that you're taking the cartridge out and putting it back in.
Yeah. Or alternatively, it's the little fine spittle that comes out.
But I actually found that like when you're blowing on the cartridge, that's actually pretty bad for it because
Yeah.
there's all kinds of stuff coming out of your mouth.
And it corrodes the contacts.
Yeah, yeah.
And I swear the blowing works.
You're supposed to be most superstitious.
But there's an embedded system there that you now emulate on probably, that's some different architecture that has probably not existed before and has not existed since.
Yes.
Nintendo, yeah, that was a 6502.
It's 6502.
Just like the Commodore 64.
20.
Yep.
Yep.
Standard 8-bit processor from the early 80s.
I think the Atari, I think the 64.
Yeah, the Atari 800.
Yeah.
Which all have emulators, by the way.
Yep.
You
Yep.
can find ROMs for them,
Oh, yeah.
Well, you can
Use
find
MAME
them.
on most of them.
if you can legally find ROMs.
Well, Atari, everything, most of that is legal anyway, due to the fact that, hey, it's actually public domain at this point, and there's still
No, it's not.
plenty of
No,
developers.
it's not. It's
No.
not public domain.
The problem
Aren't
is,
there, I mean, I think there are some of them, but not all.
There's
a bunch of
some,
them.
but
Right.
the vast majority of it is not. The ownership is not well defined.
yeah, the problem is nobody knows who owns it.
It's not.
Yeah.
You can't buy the rights because nobody knows
Yes,
if they can sell
but
them.
there's still ownership. And if someone asserts that ownership, that's where the issue comes in.
Well, they're making money reselling those games, right, on like Virtual Console and such, so.
Well, yeah, like you can go on the, Nintendo Wii and you can
Yeah.
buy the original Super Mario Brothers.
Right.
And play that.
But that's a port from Nintendo down to the Wii. Whereas like you were saying, some of the games that you can buy for the original Atari, those are either someone has the license, one of the publishers, developers, or someone recreated the game in whole. Now that still has other issues, but they didn't take the ROM and repackage it and sell it, so.
Yeah, that's kind of funny, the fact that we, as far as becoming technology, there's still plenty of people that will say, hey, I want to buy a Harmony cartridge, do some homebrew programming, hey, guess what? Here's my new Atari game, have fun with it.
It's a legal gray area is what it is.
Yeah.
So like a lot of the features that you see on Linux on x86, I think that like you can run CFS on Ubuntu Xenial on ARM64. So it's like there's nothing Intel specific in a lot of this code now.
Right.
It's becoming commodity.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, if
it's
it doesn't run on another one of those CPUs, that would be a bug.
Oh, and one thing that's done on me, only because we're experimenting with that at home a few weeks ago. If you try to install Kali Linux on, the latest version of Kali Linux on a 3232-bit system, it's not going to let you install all the way up to the hard. First, I'm going to make you go all the way through the installation process because I got an error message real quick when I was trying to install it on a junk machine. At that point, I was like, okay. They put a 64-bit machine, and I found out, oh yeah, guess what? It actually runs on a Raspberry Pi 3. So I guess now they're saying, hey, 32-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit, 64-bit. So as long as you have 64-bit instructions, it'll let you do it.
Yeah.
So no backwards compatibility on the 32-bit on the 64-bit.
Yeah, because now, as mentioned earlier, a lot of even Linux distributions are starting to just back off 32-bit completely and say we're going 64-bit all the way. Whereas ARM x86, you have a 32-bit x86. Sorry, but you're in the past at this point.
I mean, iPhone and Android are 64-bit now, so.
Yeah, it only makes sense. Yeah.
I think it may take longer, actually, for the ARM world to go to 64 bits. In Intel, there was a huge advantage to going to 64 bits, and that you got more registers in the CPU, and you ended up with a faster architecture. And that's not because 64 bits was better. It was because 32 bits with Intel was a lot worse. With Spark, 64 bits is slower because you have to load more stuff in to get things. And there's actually no performance advantage to 64 bits on Spark. The only reason there's 64 bits there is for the address space.
So one of the things that in the oil and gas space, what they're doing is, so you have this like, oh, we need 128-bit integers or 256. They're actually going the opposite direction. They're using instead of floats, they're using like 8-bit ints when they don't need that really that accuracy, and it's really speeding up their calculations.
A lot of the vector processors have had instructions that do like 8-bit floating multiplies.
Yeah, they're going from like 32 down to 16 down to 8.
Yeah.
That's how I do it.
And doing that on GPUs that were historically fantastic at integer work.
Yes.
They're basically vector processors.
Yeah, but doing floats on an NVIDIA Tesla was not great or even terrible, and they did a lot of work to get floats to work, or to get the float performance up on the Teslas, just because of research.
All right, it's got a warning saying that we have about 5 minutes left. So, anyone else have anything to talk about?
Did they ever update the space shuttle from 8086?
I think it was 386.
The space shuttle
I
had
think the space station is 486s.
No, the space shuttle had an IBM design unit that ran a lot of the 360 instruction set. It's the same thing that flies in a lot of fighter pilots.
It's the AP101.
Yeah.
AP101.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But there's like something where, talking about software that takes a long validation, the hardware that's used by NASA takes an extremely long validation period. So, they're still manufacturing 386 and 486 CPUs for NASA.
They're working on speeding that up, but yeah.
Yeah, and the other reason they do that is because the transistors in those chips are larger and less susceptible to solar radiation, which could spontaneously flip them.
Yeah, radiation hardening is complicated.
Yeah, having really large lithography.
And having redundancy and things like that, so you can withstand it.
Yeah, I mean, that used to be true. So, I mean, I work on space stuff, and small lithography has some advantages. So, 28 nanometer and below is immune to micro latch-up conditions simply because it's built on, when you have clock speeds above several gigahertz, you generally build on an insulated layer of silicon to lower the capacitance between the die and the substrate it's built on. So, a lot of the newer stuff that's built on silicon on insulator is immune to some classes of radiation effects, such as micro latch-up, but is still susceptible to single event upsets and things like that. But the funny thing about that is, servers at ECC and such, is that simply the packaging material, that's called low alpha packaging materials, is with the background radiation just present in the packaging for DRAM and such, you're susceptible to bit flips because it's packed so densely in there. So that's why servers, of course, are mission critical and have ECC through and through. But when you run your CPU in L1 and L2 cache, there's parity checking and error detection built into that simply because when your lithography shrinks to that tiny amount of a size, you actually can't guarantee error-free operation. So you just eat the penalty and add several extra address lines for parity checks and things like that. But in the power world, generally a bigger transistor is going to require less, as an ionizing particle strikes a semiconductor die and imparts what's called linear energy transfer into it, and a larger transistor is going to be somewhat more immune to an upset from that than some tiny transistors. But Conversely, the smaller lithography, just with commercial advances, has become more resistant to certain classes of
I
effects.
think some of these designs, they've been experimenting with using more commodity chips and just designing them, so, okay, it gets reset every so often.
Yeah, so the PowerPC, there's the RAD 750, which flew on the Mars rovers, and that's PowerPC 750. And the first generation of it, they just fabbed it on a custom silicon on sapphire process, and it cost an amazingly high amount of money. And then they basically took it, and they actually took like the netlist, like the actual architecture of the chip, and they redesigned it to be fabricated on conventional CMOS process on Catskill. And they got, you know, like a 40% reduction in power while maintaining the same radiation resistance and tolerance by simply designing it in a more radiation resistant manner. So like sequential elements like registers and flip-flops are easy to upset, so when possible they replace that with combinational logic that's just ands, not ors, which increases chip area, and you don't do it because it's lower performance, but for space, it didn't matter as much because they got huge power savings out of it, and they could build it on a regular foundry instead of going to some exotic process.
All right. Yeah, the topics are, I think we're done. All right, let's close out a discussion with you guys. Anyone is interested, have a few business cards, and I do have another panel tomorrow at 2 p.m. and that'll actually be the Geek After Lunch. So basically it's going to be like an hour-long workout. I'm going to give people just try different things, make it a little geek-related, a little bit more fun. 45 minutes, so basically you guys go into the area, in and out, and maybe stuff for points. So that's it.